Charlie Cooke, co-founder of Coerver Coaching and Chelsea legend. Thanks for joining us here on Channel Vision. Now, first of all, we'd love to talk to you about your glory days, or let's call them your glory days. You had quite a career playing in both the Scottish and English First Divisions. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, the one big difference I think I would say compared to today, just the state of the fields. I think today the fields are like bowling greens and it's beautiful. I think it makes for a better, game, a better, a more interesting game for the fans. And aesthetically, the ball moves around a little bit better than the old days. If you remember, in the old days, it used to be goal mouths in the middle of the season were just mud heaps sometimes. In the middle of the field got the same way. So it's certainly a different game physically on the field in that respect. I think the game itself has certainly changed a bit. TV has played a big part in, shall we say, re-educating folks, certainly in our part of the world, to sort of be a little bit more patient. And so the possession type of game is probably accepted much more in the Premiership today than perhaps it was in our day, when the crowd would be at you to get it forward and get some action going. So certainly I think it's been huge improvements in the game, aesthetically a better experience for the fans, and the game itself is played in a much more controlled way, certainly in the Premiership.
Now, playing for Chelsea for, I believe, 11 years, that must have been a highlight.
Well, I think it was just similar to today. The fans were absolutely crazy. They went everywhere, and they always carried a big following. And I think probably a highlight for many of the fans then, certainly for us as the players, was when we won the replay of the FA Cup final against Leeds at Old Trafford. I think historically it was the first time the FA Cup final had been replayed. We drew 2-2 at Wembley, and really a very heavy field, which was unusual. Wembley was always bowling green perfect, but that year, because of the Horse of the Year show, it was ankle deep in mud. I think Leeds in the first game deserved to beat us, but we hung on for a 2-2 tie. Faced each other again 3 weeks later at Old Trafford, and I think it was one of the classic cup finals. Some pretty hefty tackles, and it came out in our favour. And I think it was a highlight for certainly all the players and many of the old-time fans.
You also played for a Scottish national team and a world select team?
It's one of these things that I'm very proud of the rest of the world team, but it's one of these things that goes past without note often. Playing for the Scottish national team, it was a good experience. We never had the success perhaps that we would have hoped for. Having said that, you've got to remember back then, I think it was 18 teams or 16 teams qualified for the World Cup finals. I think over the years that's been going up every 3 or 4 or 10 years, and now it's 32 teams qualify. So I think it's an easier passage for many teams to get there. Back then, you had to be a pretty good side to get there, and we weren't quite good enough sometimes.
How did you, as a child, how did you first get into soccer?
Well, I think from our earliest days that I can remember, we were always kicking a ball. I think in Scotland and England, I think in most European countries, football was a major sport. It was a thing that was on radio anyway, and certainly in the newspapers. Certainly wasn't on TV, or if it was the very early days of TV, and then black and white, and certainly no real coverage, not the coverage like you get today. Today there's saturation coverage, and I think it's helped to move the game on enormously. But back in our days, we played by ourselves or in the street with our friends or in the local park, and it was kickabout soccer, I think, that happened all over the world, and perhaps still happens in some parts of the world. And that was our entry into the game.
After such a fruitful career, you were selected for, I believe, the Chelsea all-time 11s in 2005. How did it feel playing in the centenary celebrations?
That was really terrific because it had been, let's say, it had been an unusual takeover from the previous regime at the club, who didn't have much interest, didn't have much money or much interest in having any history that would be any difficulty for them. You had Abramovich taking over, and money suddenly flooded the club, and they were interested in resurrecting their history and their heritage. So when the Century team was selected and I made it, I was delighted. I hardly knew anything about it at the time until somebody told me. I thought, fantastic. So it was a very, very nice surprise, and I was delighted by it.
Now, if we can move on to Coerver Coaching, you're one of the creators of this coaching program. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
I think Coerver Coaching, we started it in 1984 and we were inspired by the teaching of Will Coerver. Will was an ex-defender in the Dutch First Division, had great coaching credentials. He won the European Cup with Feyenoord, but even he was very frustrated with his inability to teach attacking play to his players. At that point, he went around the world, looked at all the federations, checked out what they were doing, and he couldn't find any place that were teaching technical play, how to teach pretty good athletes, how to beat players and be much more effective on the ball. So he began creating his own way of doing this, and it all started out with the moves of the great players, guys like Pelé, Cruyff, Beckenbauer, and from those moves began the Coerver methodology. We have since taken it on. There's many more moves in the methodology, but basically it's technical teaching, and we're teaching that technical excellence leads to not only confidence but genuine creativity.
Okay, so we can understand how potential players could benefit from using Coerver. How can coaches benefit from using the program?
Well, we think it gives them an enormous amount of material, practical and engaging material to work with their players. You've got to remember that if you're simply doing tactical play every week, kids get pretty used to it. They can see through it pretty easily and perhaps go through the motions. We would like to think that through our technical training, kids are constantly challenged, constantly playing small 1v1 to 4v4, 5v5, small-sided games where we feel creativity really happens. So we don't think we take creativity and somehow jam it into their skulls, but they do it through practice and repetition and playing small-sided games for a big part of many of our practices.
There's also a series of DVDs out on the Coerver Coaching program. Can you tell us about them?
Well, basically it's showing how we in Coerver Coaching see how training should be for young players. It's certainly very much technically based. We want technical proficiency, and out of that we hope and certainly believe creativity will be born. We don't think you can take creativity and put it into young players. They have to develop it and do it themselves, and we find that the technical play engages them both mentally and physically, and so it's a demanding, progressively challenging program which keeps them engaged.
Charlie, where would you like to see the program develop into the future?
We think it's very well developed in most countries now, and we're delighted with the kind of products that are coming out of it. Some great young players, and we wouldn't for a minute assume or claim that they're being created simply by Coerver Coaching. We recognise that the role that TV worldwide has played in showing off the game, and the kind of coaching it's helping young kids to see almost each and every day of the week. But we would hope that we'd continue to develop. We have licensees throughout every region we work in, and I suppose it's simply to continue our development and continue to grow, and perhaps someday to see Coerver Coaching as the official methodology used by some of the national federations. That may be a kind of a long shot, but certainly something we like to see. We certainly think it would be very much worthwhile whatever country would take it on.
Now, Charlie, we know soccer's an extremely large sport globally. There is one sport that far outweighs soccer in its intensity, and that's the sport of juggling. How's your juggling going?
Well, my juggling, I don't know what it's like now, but it used to be a very serious part of my training when I was a youngster. And it's something we ask all the kids to do, not only juggling in the air, where they're juggling in the air with their knees, their thighs, their shoulders, their heads, but also ground juggling where they've got the ball. And some of the kids in the States now, we've got some beautiful footage of kids who can do really magnificent things with the ball on the ground. The flexibility and touch that they have, just mind-boggling. And so it's beautiful to see, and to see their imagination at play. You ask them to do a couple of moves and suddenly they add another 2 or 3 moves to it, and you're kind of scratching your head and say, where did that come from? And it's that creativity that we feel technical training produces. And so we're delighted with those kind of developments, and I just wish I could do half as well as some of these young kids.
Charlie Cooke, co-founder of Coerver Coaching, great to have you in Australia. Welcome to Canberra, and thank you for joining us on Channel Vision.
Thank you very much indeed. It's brilliant to be here a brilliant day in a brilliant country with brilliant people. Thank you. Hello, I'm Charlie Cooke, co-founder of Coerver Coaching. I'm here on Channel Vision.